Daniel Reed is going to lead today's seminar. Daniel is a professor at Warwick Business School. He's been involved in behavioural science for probably more years than he cares to remember. And he's been around since the beginning of the development, really, the explosion in behavioural public policy.
Yeah.
When I think of Daniel, I think mostly of, I think this is a compliment, Daniel, but I think mostly of your work on dynamic inconsistency and it around food choice.
Yeah.
A while ago now, but that was.
Yeah, well, I still do. I still work in that area, but it's all about something different today. Yeah.
So Daniel made profound contributions in that. He's going to speak today about how people to react to nudges when they know that there's not only a sort of social purpose to a nudge, but to like a profit maximizing or a profit concern to a nudge as well. So that's what he's going to be speaking about. And with I should say that this is a Hayek program, social policy, Department of Social Policy, Behavioral Public Policy seminar. In the usual way with these seminars, Daniel's the leader, Daniel today, is going to lead off, speak for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll hand over the rest of the time for questions and discussions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thanks. It's actually kind of exciting to be presenting here. I'm going to talk about some work. I've actually quite a lot of studies that have been done with my colleagues, Despina Alampaki, who is Depi, if I say Depi, that's who I'm referring to, and Andrea Izoni, and both of them, I think, are in the room with us today, although they have both asked me not to point to them as people who might answer questions. So I'm going to talk about doing well while doing good and talk about research on tainted nudge. Actually, we've done a lot of studies, and I'll just talk about a small number of them. But you know, you can always find out more from us later. And I've also been told not to say that the work I'll be describing is been not to mention any journals or anything, but we're very close now to having it published, and so we'll have a nice new version for you soon. Okay, so the question is how do people judge good combined with personal benefit? And I want to start with a kind of example, not a nudging example, but kind of one that just came up the last couple of weeks, I think, and it kind of intrigues me. So here's somebody, Mr. Beast. I think he's the most popular YouTuber in the world. His name's Jimmy Donaldson, actually, and that's the man here. He's smiling. And he just made a video, an 8-minute video, which you can watch, and it's really worth watching, kind of moving actually, where what he did is he paid for 1,000 people who had cataracts such that they couldn't see. I mean, they couldn't work, they couldn't see their family, and he had their eyes fixed, evidently a relatively low-cost operation. I'm not sure how much it cost per person. So he paid for 1,000 people to have their eyes fixed, and he also gave prizes to a lot of them. So here's a guy, he's just had his eyes repaired. He can now see, which he couldn't see before, and now he can read on the screen that he just won $10,000. And then he gave he paid for someone to go through college who had a blind person, suddenly can see, now can go through college, and bought someone a Tesla and so forth, right? So he's 1,000 people plus a lot of money paid out. And he also really promoted this organization, which pays for these kind of operations for people. And what happened? Well, some people, of course, thought this was great, but there was a backlash, right? Not a trivial backlash, I would say, with people making, I think quite remarkable statements. So here's an article in the New Statesman, which is British, quite a prestigious, I would say, distinguished British magazine, talking about the tasteless, dangerous rise of charity porn content. And you can see, like, really attacking Mr. Beast. This article takes no prisoners, I would say. So anyway, this is interesting. Like he's doing this, and why is this? Well, of course, Mr. Beast benefits from the video because he's the most popular YouTuber. I mean, he may be making billions really from YouTube, although he says that he's going to give away all of the money he earns. Whether he will or not, I don't know, but he's making a lot, certainly, and giving away a lot as well. What about what about the literature? What does the literature show? The literature pretty much shows that if people do good and they get some personal benefit from it, that people judge them not necessarily very negatively, but they don't treat them quite the same way as if they didn't get any benefit. So here's just a few like articles listed here. This Lynn Healy and Small article, I find remarkable the idea that someone donates to a leukemia charity, and they're judged as less positively if they had a friend who died of the disease than if they didn't have a friend who died. I can see how people might reason that this is it, but it's quite remarkable that they're judged less positively. And here's another line of literature, the Bible. What about Jesus? What did he say? Well, he says, well, if you're praying, don't be like the hypocrites. They like to go out, and pray in the street and be seen by people, but you should kind of do it privately. You don't want to kind of show off your praying. And there is a line of work spearheaded by George Newman with a number of colleagues looking at something they call tainted altruism. I'm going to call it as we call it strong tainted altruism, because it actually goes further than what I've just been describing, which is that if you get a benefit, this is the claim. If you benefit from doing good, you can be judged as worse than if you just simply benefit, right? And these authors have done a number of studies in which they show in some situations that if you compare a profit-earning activity, purely profit-earning activity, with a profit-earning activity that also does some social good, the people disapprove of the one with the social good more than the one earning a profit. And here is just an example study by from Newman and Kane, which looked at an advertisement by Patagonia. Actually, I think it's Newman and Makoff, a Patagonia advertisement in which Patagonia either advertised their products or else they advertised their products, and while doing so encouraged people not to buy any products at all because that was bad for the environment, and they were judged more negatively in that case. This is just one example of a number of studies. Okay, so that's the kind of background. Now, what we did is we wanted to look at tainted nudge, which is, does this apply to nudges? And it's particularly important for nudges because one of the sort of advantages of nudges is that they're cost effective. Companies using welfare enhancing nudges, they'll profit from those nudges. And so they can profit from them, right? So here, an example is this Diet Coke example. It costs less to produce Diet Coke than regular Coke. In general, it costs less to produce a diet drink than a regular drink because artificial sweeteners are easier to manage and cheaper than regular sweeteners like sugar. And so if you nudge people to buy Diet Coke, for example, you can increase your profit margins because they're buying things that cost you less to produce, and you don't charge less for the Diet Coke. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. So what we wanted to look at is, are these profitable nudges tainted just like other win-win initiatives? I don't know if you can see no, it's okay. My screen is partly obscured by people. Okay, so we looked for two possible effects in nudging. One of them is tainted nudge, in which a nudge that is combined with a kind of a pro-social nudge is combined with earning profit. Is that actually judged less well than one that doesn't earn a profit? Okay, so that's what we call tainted nudge. You do something purely for the social good, and you do something for social good, but you also earn a profit. Is the one judged less well if you also earn a profit? And then another question we ask is there strong tainted nudge, which means that the nudge that earns a profit, does good for society, but earns a profit, is that also judged less well than something that is just done for profit? Okay, so that corresponds to the example I gave before, the Patagonia example. Okay, so we did a number of studies using vignettes like this, And we basically gave people information about an organization. In this case, it's Wessex University, right, which is a fictional university in the UK. Wessex, a common name for a fictional UK region. And Wessex University launched new meals that were lower in fat and sugar and so forth for the students. And they either did this simply because they wanted to do good for the students, or else they did it because the meals were cheaper to provide. And or not, they didn't do it for that reason, but in fact, the meals were cheaper to provide. And so therefore, there was a kind of benefit to the university that they were able to pay their employees more. And finally, one in which the university simply did it in order to get that monetary benefit of paying the employees more. Okay. So the main comparisons were between three conditions. You can see them here on the screen. A social only condition in which they kind of, they helped the students. A social plus profit in which they helped the students, but they also profited from it. And then a profit only condition. And all of our studies, you have similar types of conditions, with different circumstances, but I'm just going to talk about this one. And so the question is, do we find tainted nudge? Do people judge social plus profit as being not as good as the social only? And also, do we find strong tainted nudge in which the social plus profit is judged more poorly than profit only? Okay. So I'll just show you some results. Okay. So these are the measures we took, by the way. We took 3 measures, and we looked individually at each measures. A lot of other research sort of collapses measures like this into one scale, but we looked at all of them separately. And this is the finding. Into these 3 measures, we found tainted nudge, and quite consistently, but not strong tainted nudge, right? So we do find, just as earlier studies have, that people judge nudges that earn a profit not as well, not as positively as nudges that don't earn a profit, when those nudges lead to social good. Okay? But if the nudges or the same kind of activity only leads to profit, then it's judged much worse than the nudge that has both profit and social good. Okay? And another thing we found that's interesting is that like 2 of our measures are all about, sort of ethics. How good is the company? How pro-social is it? How moral is it? The 3rd measure is about whether they support the organization. And what we find is there's very little tainting for support. And this actually is a kind of theme throughout our work, that people's, they still pretty much support the organization, even though they might feel that, they're not as pro-social and not as moral if they earn a profit. There is some loss of support, but it's quite modest.
Could I just ask a quick clarification, Daniel?
Yeah.
In those tests, are those between subjects? So they're
yeah, everybody gets a single scenario. Yeah. So it's completely. Which no, a good question actually. I didn't say that. I'm trying to kind of give just almost an abstract, right? But yeah, that's a good point.
No, okay,
yeah. So every study is between participants, and there's a lot of people too in the studies. 100, 200 per condition, generally. Okay, so we also why is it that we get strong tainted nudge in some studies and not others? Well, we've done quite a bit on this, and I won't go into that kind of history of it, but looking at the existing work and also our own research, we thought that one of the things that seems to stand out is that when people get strong tainted nudge, that the materials they use contain some hints or suggestions that the company is being deceptive, right? It's not just that they're earning a profit, but they're kind of implying that they're either not stating outwardly to customers that they're earning a profit, or else they're even trying to perhaps potentially even hide that fact. Okay. So we thought that perhaps deception was the key factor in that. if the nudging organization deceived their consumers or their public, that they would be judged negatively, but if they didn't, they would be judged, fine or neutrally. And what we did in these studies is we compare, the one thing I'm going to describe at any rate is we compared a situation in which the company deceives, it does something socially positive, but deceives with a company that just earns a profit, but doesn't deceive, just earns a profit. Okay? Would we find strong tainted nudge under those circumstances? And actually, just to say, so these are the conditions. This is we call this a social D plus profit condition. They deceive about the social purpose, and profit only. They earn a profit, but they don't deceive at all, right? So in the social D plus profit, they say that their purpose is a social one, but in fact, their purpose is a profit, right? But they also do the social good. They also achieve the social good. And here's like a quote from another paper showing the kinds of things that made us think that deception was involved, because there's always some hint that the company is doing something and they want their customers to feel they're really being, good for society, when really they're doing it to get their customers to think that so they can earn more money, right? I'm not even saying that's a bad thing to do, but there is an element of deception. So we tested this, and just the basic finding, I think I'll try to say it quite quickly here, because I expect I've used up most of my time and I have a few more things to say. The basic result is that when we ask a question about honesty, which is something we added in these deception studies, we do find a big effect where, oh, by the way, what this is comparing is the profit and social D, social deception plus profit condition. We find a big effect, right? Definitely people think they're less honest, right? That's like a manipulation check, really. Very small effects, and this varies from study to study, but always very small effects on other measures such as prosociality and morality. Whether you would want to call this strong tainted nudge or not. And then we also find that for support, if anything, people still support the deceptive company more because, well, not because, the reasons we can debate, but indeed that the company, while being deceptive, is producing a social good, right? So there's higher support for the social good option even after deception. Okay, so just to say a little bit more about our studies, we've studied a lot of contexts, for-profit versus non-profit. Are you the nudgee, the person being nudged, or others are? Health domain, finance domain, and we've studied deception, by the way, in other domains apart from these, but we haven't been talking about that today. We've studied the kind of nudge, the default nudge versus the one in which the menu is rearranged so that the healthy options are first, and various nudging institutions, such as like hospitals, universities, and so forth. Just going to show you quickly a composite analysis. So this is a composite analysis. I must really thank Deppy for this, because I'm just praise Deppy, not thank her, praise Deppy for this, because it's how excellent this is. But we combined all of our studies together into a composite analysis. And what do we find? Well, some tainting, but not much for support. Like in general, people support the things, and the fact that the company earns profit or not, it doesn't seem to matter a lot. See, as you can see, the green thing shows the low tainting for profit. No strong tainting overall. So what this shows is that the zero line would be, if you went below that, there would be strong tainting, but you see always it's above that, indicating that no hint really of strong tainting. Deception cancels out the effect of social good. So on this line, if it's on this line, it means that with deception, the effect of the kind of social good has been completely canceled out, and you can see that's basically it. Except even with deception, support is higher when there is social good plus deception than for profit only. So yeah, that's a summary of our results. Just to say, I also did the last few days, I did a couple of polls on social media, and I asked this question, right, about tainted nudge. A soft drink company successfully nudges its consumers to take diet drinks rather than sugary drinks. Both types of drinks cost the same. Diet drinks are healthier, but cost less to deliver. So that's where the company profits from doing this? Do you approve? And I did 2 polls, and you can see that the great majority of people do approve. And if you take in the count of people who think they should drop the prices, but they still approve anyway, they think they should drop the prices, which are a bit like people who are a bit skeptical. Very few people disapprove of that, and that's true both on Reddit and on Twitter. So, and that's, I think, where I'll draw things to a close. I've put up a few possible questions for discussion, but happy to answer questions and discuss, well, anything. I may call on Depi and Andrea, however, if the discussion gets too heated.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Could you possibly bring your slides down, just because it's easier for
yeah, I can.
this discussion. If you do
that. How do I stop sharing, right?
Yeah,
so I do. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. So we're going to proceed in the normal way, everybody. So if you could put your virtual hand up if you want to ask a question, make a comment, and I'll take them in the order in which you want to ask. Over to you. Malte.
Hello,
Hi,
Daniel. I have a question that is really probably a minor question and related to the last question on your last slide.
Okay, yeah.
But I had it popped up during your talk in my mind, and that's the question, did you try to differentiate in your finding what type of moral agents we are? Meaning, some of us are more consequentialist, utilitarian, some are more deontologists and stuff, just to get at, let's say, the utility function of the people nudged. There's a huge discussion, right, obviously in behavioral economics, that we shouldn't just work with one agent, but we actually have multiple agents here. We shouldn't look at averages. We should look at different people that we're actually studying, different types that we're studying. And it seems interesting, your research, because particularly the social media poll lends itself to which is different types, right?
Yeah.
And that in itself could be interesting. Is there anything in your work on this? Or?
Okay, so I mean, one answer I think would be no. We haven't looked a lot at any kind of differences or even necessarily the nature of people's reasoning, but we are talking about it now, and I think that line of thinking has been accelerated a bit. Like we've been working on trying to get these papers written based on what we have, but now we're talking about explanations. Actually, you mentioned the social media, and if you're interested, I can share with you like those. Well, I can share the polls and the Reddit polls. People do discuss the questions that I asked. I mean, not a lot, but it's remarkable to me how, and there is quite diversity, right? Of all, so the soft drink example, I've actually asked a lot of questions on Reddit on these themes, and the soft drink question, a lot of people say, oh, well, the soft drinks are unhealthy, right? And that's what a lot of commentary is about, even though most people support it. So I'm expecting the people who don't support it are the ones who are complaining about the unhealthy soft drinks. So it may be that this is underestimating the degree of support. But no, that's exactly, though, something that we want to explore now. And we've been talking about, is it that, and I think, so personally, I don't speak for the others, personally, I expect there's a large consequentialist element that really people do think, what's the best thing for society? And this is what I support. And of course, there will be differences. But in addition, I think that and this is for deception, I think people just don't like deception. And so that drags down the company or the individual. If they think people think they're being deceived, that drags them down, and that's not consequentialist in itself. But I imagine consequentialism or some kind of consequentialist approach is the main driver of people's responses to these things.
Thanks.
I mean, this is just it's speculation though right now. Needs some more data, but I hope to get it actually.
Thanks, Marty. Joanne.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation. I was just wondering whether maybe these tainted altruism results are driven by perhaps trust. So the credibility of a company that is supposed to engage in some kind of altruism and at the same time pursuing some kind of for-profit, let's say, goal, right? So that for-profit dimension might weaken the credibility of altruism, and that might not be the case always. It might depend on the activities that we are looking at. So it could be that Patagonia happens because it's more environmentally driven, and maybe it doesn't crowd out that altruism or doesn't taint the altruism that much. But perhaps when it comes to soft drinks, we see that effect. So I wonder whether you've looked at whether some characteristics of the companies in this case or the activities actually explain whether there is more or less tainted altruism. Yes, and again, I mentioned whether altruism towards the environment is different from altruism towards health or towards others.
Yeah. Okay. The last part was a bit kind of difficult for me to hear, actually.
So basically, just basically whether there is trust as driving the effect, and whether the characteristics of the companies or the activities engaging in altruism, whether those characteristics matter, and actually the altruistic activities themselves, like for instance, whether altruism towards the environment or towards health or others more generally, make a difference. Yeah.
So we've looked at different domains. Perhaps the biggest separation is between the domain of like financial advice and health and nudges, like health nudges, like the diet ones I showed you. And we define the same pattern, right? I mean, perhaps if we were to put those up against one another, we would find effects are smaller or larger in the same. But because the materials are different, we can't make sort of, I think, one-to-one comparisons. But like it does seem that the sort of tainting is probably greater in the health domain than in the finance domain. That would be my inference based on the data we have, but it's not perfect because we can't do that one-to-one comparison, right? So we haven't made those kind of claims in anything we've written, but we have talked about it, and this is something that we would like to look at. The issue of trust, I think more generally the issue of attribution is important. Like if a company or an individual does something for, and gains a benefit from doing so, then there's a natural question of, well, like first, why are they doing it? How committed are they to doing it? And maybe even a question about the quality of what they're delivering, right? So if I do something and I get some private benefit, then I might just be doing it for that reason, and therefore maybe willing to cut corners and so forth. And so therefore, you may infer that the quality of what I'm doing is not as good as if I'm doing it solely for social good, and I think that's quite reasonable for people to infer, but that's something that needs to be explored again. And you mentioned the nature, I think, of the company doing it. Well, we've looked at things like private versus nonprofit organizations, and really those things don't, if we control for the nature of the organization, but just have private versus profit earning organization, that doesn't make a difference at all, actually. And also it doesn't make a difference if you're being nudged or other people are in our studies. So we think the main patterns are reliable and are going to be seen, repeatedly. The strength of effects is likely to vary, but we can't say anything definitive about how. So sorry.
Thanks, John. Avshalom, next.
Thank you, Daniel. Very interesting paper. Just maybe two comments. One is it would be interesting, and obviously this is further research beyond this, to see whether there's any connection between the findings that you find about perceptions here and the actual efficacy of these nudges, because you could have various hypotheses of how these might relate to people's perception. Like it could be, for example, that these nudges are equally efficacious regardless of, say, the profit component, in which case maybe the negative views are maybe a reaction to that. It could be that we actually get a difference in the effect. So I think that's an interesting, particularly when we think about it in the context of policy, it might be interesting to sort of tease out how do these perceptions, which are an important component of the story, how do they relate to the actual efficacy? So that might be something to consider. A second point is that you make this basic analogy to the tainted altruism literature, and it's a natural connection. But there's one potentially important distinction between the two contexts, because when we judge altruistic behavior, we judge how an actor behaves themselves. And here, although the behavior, you could say, is the nudging, how the organization nudges, ultimately the effect is mediated through, again, the effects of the nudge on the individuals that are targeted, whether it's consumers or somebody else. So again, this may be sort of a pretty significant difference how we judge, because we have both in terms of the agency of the people who are nudged, and just because we are affecting other people's behavior as opposed to our own behavior, again, there may be a pretty significant distinction in this comparison. Thank you.
I mean, I think that's right, and we discussed some of these things in the paper, maybe actually not as eloquently as you have, and I feel like maybe go look back at what we say. But one of the reasons why we thought that this wasn't just a straightforward, replication of tainted altruism work is because there are so many differences going from the sort of individual donating to charity, or even an organization donating to charity, and then an organization nudging consumers, that we couldn't automatically infer that previous findings would apply. And of course, the practical benefit of understanding it in the domain of nudges. I don't really have a lot more to say about that, although these are very good points, and I really want to go back to the and think about like what we're saying, and in relation to this,
Okay.
maybe that's the next paper too.
Nick.
Yeah, hi Daniel.
Hi.
A very simple question, really, or two related questions. One is, how much do you think the phenomenon is the same as you'd expect if we were just dealing with individual interactions with other people? So is it that people are sort of anthropomorphizing a company and thinking, well, if I'm judging whether a person's a nice person or not, and I see them doing a nice thing, and then I think, yeah, but actually they want to do that for their own reasons. Like they go and visit somebody, but then it turns out they actually wanted to go to the shop next door to buy something anyway, or something. Do you think it's essentially the same kind of process?
Well, nothing I think in the results suggests that it isn't, actually, is what I would say, because the same patterns are there, that people judge companies that are nudging and earning a profit less well than companies that are nudging and not earning a profit, assuming there's some good that comes from the nudge, just as people are judging the person who gives money to leukemia research less well if they have a friend who had leukemia, and it's
totally weird, isn't it?
It's a striking result, but it's the same sort of, the pattern seems fundamentally similar. So there's nothing, I personally could not say that people are not doing pretty much exactly what you say, treating the organization as if it were an individual acting to help other individuals. Like, clearly that isn't, there are a lot of other differences between the situations, but people may be making some kind of direct either moral or consequentialist analysis of these things, and making a quite similar analysis in both cases. There may be a difference, but we haven't been able to sort of like identify what that would be.
Yeah. And I suppose the other sort of tiny point, which is it's only obvious really, is that I suppose it makes one wonder, this kind of case makes one wonder if there's a kind of analog of virtue ethics for organizations, because obviously a lot of the time in human interactions. We're trying to think who's being nice and who isn't.
Yeah.
And so when we think, oh, that organization's really being nice there because it's doing that good thing, and then we think, no, it's fooling me, and it's actually doing it for something profitable, but it didn't say. I think, oh, it's a nasty organization. And that may, and it doesn't seem like it does too much, actually, but it might, in principle, sometimes leak over to the action as well. And you kind of think it's a nasty organization, but the action was good.
Yeah.
But obviously, presumably, sometimes that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's what our deception work suggests. And actually, there are many other dimensions of how you would evaluate an organization. So we've looked at a subset of dimensions, right? And it may be that deception doesn't matter for a lot of other aspects of the organization. So we look at support, right, which is sort of a stand-in for, how do people, would they want to use that organization? Would they recommend it to friends and so forth? But there would be many other dimensions, and we don't have information on that. And I actually think this is another line of inquiry, like what are the nature, what is the form of the impact of people's, what kinds of judgments are they making about what? And we sort of certainly started out and following, the existing literature, asking questions similar to those that were asked by previous researchers, and then it's expanded it a bit, but they could be expanded a lot more. And I think that would then give us a better idea of, like, for instance, are there dimensions of evaluation where they are very different for organizations and individuals? Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Good.
Yeah. Thank you for this interesting paper. I have a question that follows up an earlier question by Avi, I think. So the issue is whether maybe deception improves or reduces the effectiveness of nudges. Now, there is a new paper in PNAS by Maximilian Meyer, and co-authors include David Jenks and Eric Jan Wagenmakers, who have reanalyzed the previous meta-analysis by Mertens, and they conclude, and this is their title, no evidence for nudging after adjusting for publication bias. And they find no evidence in the domain of health, nor on food, nor on environment, nor in finance. And according to their analysis, all the effect reported is due to publication bias. How do you deal with this paper?
Well, two things, I guess. That first, I knew about this paper, but I haven't read it very carefully. But you get, as you say, from the title, you get from the title very clearly what it is. So we're interested in how people respond to. It's like, I feel like our investigation is on an orthogonal theme. It's like, how do people judge whether when they are being nudged or when other people are being nudged? How do people judge those organizations? And those nudges may or may not be effective. And I'm, I understand the skepticism about nudging and how well it works and how much of an impact it has. But the fact is that organizations do undertake nudging activities. They try to do it. They try to kind of, push people to, buy healthy soft drinks, or they push their investors to buy, perhaps more stocks and not keep cash. My bank does that to me, for example. And whether it works or not is something that is, that we're not addressing. We're addressing how do people feel about it? How do they respond to it?
I understand that it's orthogonal to your, but at least by reading your paper, you seem to assume, talking about cost effectiveness of nudges, you seem to assume the usual story. And this is what I wanted to know your opinion independently. I understand this is orthogonal on this phenomenon. So there could also be a moral issue. So if it were true, what this Meyer paper shows, and in my reading, it's quite convincing, then the presenting nudging as effectiveness after this paper is a moral issue. And as we know that quite a few of the behavioral insights teams that propose nudging are now multi-billion companies. So the issue is, do we deal with science or do we deal with business?
Okay, so this is actually, no, I see what you're saying. Actually, I don't really know how to answer your question precisely, because I feel a bit that, you know, the basis of it's good. The basis of our paper is that this is the kind of expectation, right? That if nudges work, that they then, as expected, then they will lead to profit. They can lead to profit, and well, what you know, how do we deal with that? Now, if in fact that premise is wrong, and that, you know, nudges, you know, don't work and don't lead to profit, and I don't know, then still, I think though that what we've made is a contribution, which is about, because I really think the main contribution is about people's perceptions of situations that produce good and yet also produce profit, right? Which then those types of situations are likely to arise, even if it turns out that this particular example of it isn't one. So there will be many situations in which a company can do good for everybody. In fact, you could even argue that, you know, most profit-earning companies, you know, produce good for society. You know, otherwise they wouldn't earn profits, because, you know, people are buying their goods. But at the same time, you know,
my remark is not a critique of your paper, not at all. I appreciate the paper. It's just a much broader question. So, and I also can easily imagine that if nudges don't work, you can make lots of profit from that by selling them. So there are quite lots of doubt about big companies who use types of nudging, making lots of profit, whether they work at all. Like advertisement has been always kind of black box, whether it works or not, but highly profitable.
This is I mean, it's definitely a challenging comment. I feel like this would be a good topic for us to discuss in this group. You know, like sort of almost separately. I'm sure we. Hey.
We do discuss this topic occasionally, you know.
Yeah, no, clearly.
I'm surprised at Ger's comment though, because I thought you were a big supporter of nudging as well, Ger. So I'm surprised that you've been a bit.
Sorry?
I thought you were a big supporter of nudging, so I'm a bit surprised by your comment.
That's a bit ironic. I'm a supporter of boosting. I think we should.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
Rather than treating like sheep and putting somewhere.
Okay. I think we just do need to move on though, because we've got a couple more questions that want to come in. But thanks for that, Gerd. Thanks. Bob.
I must say, I mean, I don't think this isn't a criticism of what you're doing, and it's more a kind of criticism of the people answering your questions. I sort of feel very uneasy about this whole kind of idea that you can only be truly moral if you're acting contrary to your own interests, and the idea that there's something that the whole idea that a behavior that benefits other people is tainted if you benefit as well. And that's contrary. I mean, this is contrary to the whole kind of ethos of reciprocity, which myself and Adam are very keen on. I mean, and as you say, I think you see this contrast between Adam Smith and Kant. Kant has a sort of picture, you know, you can only be purely altruistic if you've got no aspect of self-interest. Whereas Smith is saying, isn't it a great thing about the world? I mean, why do we find benevolence in the world? Well, the most likely reason for it is because it's advantageous. And so if you spread the idea, so in a certain sense, I'm acting a preacher against Jesus, I suppose, really. But, you know, if you spread the idea that there's no morality, nothing you can do is moral unless it harms you. It seems like a bad move. And you think of these firms. I mean, if the a Coke firm already knew that it would already be selling its products at the ones that's cheapest the cheapest ones to produce that the consumers want to buy. Obviously, it wants to do that. Would anyone seriously expect a firm? I mean, this is a little bit like what Nick was saying, although I think it's also true of people too. Would you seriously expect a firm to be a Jesus like altruist? Would you seriously expect the firm to be doing good without anyone knowing it and just losing? And you surely, anybody who's just kind of got a sense, a sort of reasonable amount of intelligence would think, well, if a company is, if a company is saying, well, we're having a green policy, or we're having healthy food, you'd assume that there was something in it for them, and quite likely it's reputation. They want to be seen as, this is they want to get credit for doing these things. And rather than thinking, oh, this is terrible, they're doing these things because they want to get credit, you should be thinking, well, that's great, because if there's this kind of attitude that firms ought to be doing these useful things, and that induces the firms to do it. So I just feel there's something really, really, and I think it's dangerous, and also it's childish. It's a sort of childish concept of morality that thinks that you can't have that the only kind of goodness is intending to be altruistic. So I always hope that this isn't what people think. And that people do it, and I think that I hope that people have some kind of basic understanding of the way the world works, which is reciprocity. But anyway, that's my preaching.
Oh, well, yeah. So I actually think I probably agree with you pretty much 100%. So this is about, of course, the paper. It concerns how people respond to these situations and not how they should respond. But I also agree with you, and in fact, we make similar comments in the. We have two papers that were, and we say similar things in both. One of them even has a little paraphrase of Adam Smith, making this point. I completely agree, but at the same time, it does seem that people do respond, somewhat negatively to self-interest. But I think, though, that actually our findings for organizations, the tainted nudge suggestion is actually that this negative judgment is very small, and I think that it may not be unreasonable to think that perhaps a company or an individual who is not motivated entirely by by goodwill might deliver a little less of the social good than someone who is entirely motivated. And I feel like that is what we can see in both in people's responses to organizations, but I think also in the other literature, right? That there's something like, if a person is not so strongly motivated, or intrinsically motivated, they're not so strongly intrinsically motivated, then they may not deliver as much. I think that's maybe the kind of judgments that people are making. But so I think people are a little more consequentialist than perhaps some of the literature, the interpretations of the literature suggest. But this is also something for future, I think, for future discussion, because like I've been thinking about it. We all have, like the three of us have been talking about it, but we haven't really come to a conclusion about it. But I think that in terms of the philosophy or the ethics, we could, or at least I completely agree with you. I have a feeling that my colleagues do as well.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Bob. Back to Avishalam, actually.
Thank you. Take a second bite of the apple because we have a couple of minutes. First of all, I would like to echo what Bob just said. I would make a stronger claim. It's not just about reciprocity. It's obviously the basic holding constant what you call the social contribution. Also having a private contribution means that we're just having a larger social pie, in fact. So from a simple consequentialist perspective, this is actually harmful, assuming that we keep it the same. So that's something I think, if you explore further, it might be worth looking at, particularly if you sort of alert people to the total size of the pie, for example, how does that affect, these kinds of judgments? A second point that actually relates to what we talked before about corporations. I think as a first approximation, an organization, particularly a corporation, would be profit maximizing. And they could maximize profits using this stuff in a number of different ways. They can maximize it through the reputation channel, even if there's no effect, which is related to what you said before. They could also maximize it because it has some effect and it leads people, it's not necessarily even better for people, but let's say leads them to buy a greener product or a healthier product and so forth that is more profitable for the corporation. So it's actually, I think, interesting if you look at this further to try to sort of, again, separate, at least hypothetically, in these types of studies, these mechanisms, because that can affect both how people judge it and, of course, the real world likelihood of whether what we see is effective or not. And just a quick final word to Gerd, he's back with us. I just presented in this forum last week a paper that I will not reiterate here. A couple of the people have heard it, about that basically challenges both the notion that nudges are cost effective, as Bernard said, I'll say, and that cost effectiveness is even the relevant metric as opposed to cost benefit. But again, I will not repeat my remarks from last week. Thank you.
You want to respond to any of that, Daniel, or?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I kind of just mostly agree with what you said. And I must say, I apologize for not being here last week. I had something else to do, and now I've realized I should watch the video. So, and then we can learn a lot more.
We've got 2 more questions left. If you keep them relatively short, Nick and then Chris. So Nick first, and then Chris can have the final questions. Nick.
Yeah, no, mine is very quick. Just picking up Bob's point, I guess, I mean, I'm also sympathetic to the idea that some sort of general notion of mutual benefit is very foundational in morality. But at least at the level of interpersonal relationships, it's very different if you discover that somebody's coming to help you with your shopping or something, and you discover they're actually getting paid by somebody to do it, or it's right next to this shopping they want to get themselves, so that it's no trouble for them, because it changes your view of counterfactuals, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You think, well, if someone wasn't paying him anymore, they'd stop, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Well, and that would be true with the company too. You might think, well, right now I'm watching them, they're doing this, but if the situation changes and or they're unobserved, they'll suddenly do the opposite. So I'm now very suspicious of them and don't.
Exactly. So that would be a reason for judging company less positively if it earned a profit from doing an action, right? Because you think that, oh, it might bail out if it's not earning a profit.
Yeah. So it depends how much you think they're trapped in the code where they can only make profits by doing good. If you think they can sneakily get away with profiteering by bad methods, then maybe you should become more suspicious. Anyway,
although if you're suspicious that pure altruism is a sustainable motivation, then you might that paying people is more secure.
You might worry about that too.
Yeah, but it goes in both directions. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can leave that as a comment, Nick, right? And we'll finish with a question from Chris.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for a really interesting talk and discussion. And I really just wanted to respond to Gerd's point about this PNAS paper, which I didn't know about. So first off, thanks for telling me about it. But I was just thinking, is the sort of the zero effect in these different domains, wouldn't that be consistent with the idea that some nudges work, others don't, and there is a publication bias, and it's only the sort of successful ones that get published? But that would be, wouldn't that, if that was right, wouldn't that be sort of consistent with sort of nudges being still a sort of good tool? You've just got to sift out the good ones from the bad ones, and it might be that the publication process isn't giving us a sort of good view of the good ones and the bad ones, but it wouldn't be nudges don't work necessarily.
So the authors conclude that there is no evidence that nudges work after publication bias. So that means that those papers are being biased. So if you think about the usual tree that you get here, if you plot the effect size against the precision of the studies as measured, say, by the number of subjects or repetitions, then you should get a tree around the true effect. And if you see only mainly half of the tree, and on the other side, very few studies, then that's a sign for publication bias. And then you can estimate the true the true effect size from completing that tree. So that's the kind of thought model behind it. And of course, it is whether nudges have an effect. So what I often see, that there's an immediate effect, like with hand washing studies, immediate effect. Then it goes down to what it was. And sometimes, for instance, in one of the hand washing studies, it goes below before, because, for instance, doctors and nurses get upset being treated like sheep. And for instance, the German chancellery has a behavioral team. It's a boosting team, not a nudging team. And they seem to have much more effect.
We're going to have to finish here, Gerd. I think that though you do raise important issues, obviously, and so does, I think, Chris does as well, actually. So this might be a topic that is worthy of, I think it definitely is worthy of a future seminar in this series. That's
sounds like
what's coming out there. We have to finish now. I just want to thank you all for attending today. Obviously, I want to thank Daniel for leading this discussion. I think it's fascinating. And we've had such a great bunch of questions. So I hope you feel as though you've got something out of it as well, Daniel.
Definitely. It's great.
It's a reciprocity, I guess, right there.
Yeah.
Before we finish, I always forget, but I really want to thank Irina Zaraisky. Irina is Tim Besley's PA, and she really helps me to organise these seminars, as you can probably tell from the emails that we get from her. So very much, Irina.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.
And we'll finish at that point. We'll see the next seminar will be in April.